Welcome back, guys. This is the Rogue Painter bringing you another episode of Mortal Realms Monday. So today we're going to be taking a look at a knight-Questor, another hero character, not necessarily a character, but definitely a hero model. And so we're going to be painting him in non-metallic metals. So first of all here, I'm just showing where I've left the arms and the head off, so that I can better get to the areas that would be behind the shield and the sword. Just going over here where we'll be having the different colours of the cloak would be blue, the top of the shoulder pads there would be blue, as well as the knee pads here would also be blue. So for this we're going to be taking some Cantor blue. And thinning it down ever so slightly, just so we get a nice even coat of paint on here. We're just going to apply this to all of our blue areas. So like I said, down the back side of the cloak here, as well as the knee pads and the right shoulder guard, which would be, as we're looking at it, the left pauldron, as well as the front area of his shield. Also, he does have a bit of a blue trim just around the chainmail of his tabard that hangs just below his leather pieces around his knees. So, if you guys would like to go ahead and get on with getting a nice even couple of layers of Cantor blue on those areas, and we will be back in just a moment. Okay, and once that's done, we're going to take some Dawnstone Grey, and we're just going to again give a nice even coat on the inside of the cloak here. We are building this up to what will be a nice white colour, but we always start with a darker grey, just so we can get some of that depth in between the folds and that, so that as we build it up to our white, we end up with some shadows and some nice white highlight areas. So again, this is just the entire area of the cloak behind the character there, so the inside of the cloak, as well as the part of the cloak that folds outwards on the back. Also on the back of the cloak, he has a little symbol down in the bottom left corner, and you can also go over and do that grey, or you can just leave that until towards the end and we can go white. So this is the fold area here. You'll notice that it folds back on itself and then slowly wraps around to the underside. So just be aware of that as you paint that area up, and so that you don't colour or paint anything on the outside of the robe down in the fold down there. So all I'm doing here is just using the side of the bristles just to get a nice sharp edge on the edge of the fold there, and now obviously working my way inside the robe on the other side of him there. So if you guys would like to again go ahead and apply some grey to the cloak for your guys if you are following along, and we will be back in just a bit. Okay, so once we've got the blue and the grey done here, I'm just taking some Drakenhof Nightshade, and I'm just running that down in all the recesses of the blue area, just to add a little bit of depth down there. And you will notice I then go over some of the larger flat areas as well, just to get it a smooth blend. You don't have to be too careful with this, but obviously try not to get it on any areas you don't want it, and try not to let it pull too much, otherwise you'll get sort of tide marks when it dries. So as you can see, I'm just sort of painting it smooth now and blending it out. And the reason I cover the whole of the flat areas is that way it does avoid tide marks altogether, and we'll be going back over anyway with the Cantor blue. So obviously just making sure I get a good amount of the Drakenhof in here, and I do move on to the shoulder pad. If you do the same on there, let it pull up a little bit in those recesses along the edge of the shoulder pads, and the same with the two knee pads. So yeah, the idea is just to get it as smooth as possible, with a little bit of build up in those sort of deep recessed areas. And then what I tend to do, because gravity will try to pull the wash down, I tend to lay the model a very slight incline but almost flat, face down, just so that the ink doesn't pull all the way at the bottom of the model, that it will hold higher up in some of those recesses. Right, so now that the Drakenhof Nightshade had time to dry, I'm now going to go back over with a few layers of thinned down Cantor blue. And obviously I'm going to apply this over all the flat areas and any of those sort of peaks and high points, raised up areas. And what I'm doing here is just blending it down into the recess there. This is quite thin down paint, so as it goes down in them recesses, that will dry sort of clearer than it is then as it goes on, and that gives it a nice smooth blend or gradation into the recess there. And then with each successive layer I stop further and further short of where I did the previous time, stepping it back slightly, just a millimetre or two, and that will give a nice gentle blend from the brighter Cantor blue down into the Drakenhof covered Cantor blue. So again, I'll do this over all the blue areas that we did before. So it's all over the cloak here, the shoulder pauldron. With that I tend to just do it on the largest areas, making sure to stay just shy of touching any other edges, and where it will meet a raised area, and that will give a little bit of shadow just along those edges then. So again, just picking off the raised edges here and then blending that down into that shadow area, all the time being aware of my light source coming from directly above the model. So the most sort of brighter highlighted areas will be sharp edges, as well as the larger flat areas that are more parallel to the ground. So the more vertical it is, the less light can touch it, as it will be hidden by anything above it. And then the more parallel it goes, the brighter the highlights you'll get. And you'll see that in the next stage of when we add the next layer of highlights. Okay, now moving on to the next layer of highlight, we're going to take a 50-50 mix of the Cantor blue and Teclis blue, maybe leaning a little more towards the Cantor blue side. And again, working with a thin down paint. I never use these straight as they are from the pot. Always work with it mixed down with some water, dilute it down, and you'll get a smoother finish, as well as a smoother transition between the shades. As the thinner the paint, the less opaque it is, allowing for the underlayer to show through. So now all I'm really doing with this is just going over all the sharp edges, like I say, straight down the back, and then obviously catching the flat area here, or the peaks rather, at the base of the cloak. And I think here I'm just adding a touch more water, just to thin it down a little bit more. Yep, that was it. So now with it thinned down a little bit more, it makes it easier to get a smooth blend between the colours, and it will obviously take a few more layers to build it up to that brighter blue, to as though it was opaque. So this is what I meant by the parallel bottom area catching the most light. There's a couple of wrinkles up the top there, and then some of the bulges of the armour as it pushes the cloak out is going to pick up that light as well. So obviously I'm just going over these areas, allowing the layer to dry, and then back over. Obviously here I'm just blending this into the Cantor blue that was there, and just feathering it out down at the bottom as it fades into the Cantor blue. And like I say, each time just taking a step back from the previous layers to allow for that nice smooth graduation. Okay, and again here I'm using multiple layers. I think I have added a little bit more of the Teclis blue now for this subsequent layer. Again, working with it very thin, but this is now becoming the top highlight, so it is literally just on the edges and on the largest of the flat surfaces. And this will be before we move on to the final highlight for the blue. And just for the pauldron here, I'm just sort of imagining that the pauldron is a smooth object, that it doesn't have the iconography in the middle. I'm placing the highlight where it would be if that iconography wasn't there. So it would be down the center and then curling around the bottom there. So now I'm just taking some pure Teclis blue, and again this is going to be thinned down with water, but this will make our final highlight for all of our blue areas. And that will be the majority for the edge highlighting on the robes, as well as a little bit of spot highlighting on the pauldron. So again, with the side of the bristles, and just on the point there, so the side of the point, I'm just pulling down where I think the light would catch the most, so right up on the top. And as I said, any flat areas and parallel peaks on the base there. And again, this is thinned down, so it will take a few layers to build up before you start seeing it properly, but that allows for the nice build up of tone there. So I'll go ahead and get on with this, and we'll jump ahead to the next stage. Okay, so once we have all the blue done for the highlights, the back of the cloak is pretty much complete now, as well as the pauldron, the knee guards and the edge of the bottom. So now we're going to take a 50-50 mix of the Dawnstone and the Ulthuan Grey, and for this we're going to again step up on the inside of the cloak towards that white. So we did, our first layer was Dawnstone, now we're building up a 50-50 mix of Dawnstone and Ulthuan Grey, leaning a little bit more towards the Dawnstone side if anything, and again we're thinning it down with water. We're just going to apply it in thin layers, leaving some of that original Dawnstone down in the recesses. So you can see here I'm just working with the thin down. This is super thin paint, so as it dries it will take on the tone of the grey underneath. And what I'm doing here is just picking out a small section of the fold. And you can see that as I come down I'm leaving some of the under area just a little bit darker. Again, this does take multiple passes, multiple layers, but it's the only way you can get a nice smooth graduation, at least I find, with this technique. The only other technique would be to use wet blending, which is something else. It's another technique, but it's not something that I'm as keen on for certain things. I find that, you know, different techniques have their places, and for this I prefer to get the gradations. So again, I'm going back over these areas, and this is just brightening it up, as obviously it's leaving more and more paint over those areas each time. I'm just trying to get it as smooth as possible. You don't have to worry too much if you end up with sort of little blotches in the first couple of layers, as that will smooth out with subsequent layers over the top, as the paint becomes more opaque with more layers of paint being applied. So don't worry too much about it being blotchy, just try to get it as smooth as possible in you know, 1 or 2 passes. Let that layer dry and then go back over. Obviously I'm making sure that I catch all the underside of the robe here, as well as the edges where it transitions to the blue on the other side. So I'll go ahead and get that, and we'll jump on to the next stage. Okay, so next up is the scrolls coming off of his left hand side, and for that we're going to apply a base of Zandri dust just over the entire scroll. I think I do this just in 2 or 3 coats, it doesn't need a lot. You can, if you wish, give it more of a dry brush so that you don't cover in the runes, but we are going to be applying a wash down in those anyway. So again, just slightly thin down, going over the entire scroll or banner piece, whatever you want to call it, and obviously making sure to cover both sides. And I'll give this a couple of layers until it's as opaque as the paint out of the pot, but without it being done in one thick blob clogging up those details. And that is kind of what you always want to aim for, is to get it almost as opaque as the pot, you know, the pure paint, but without clumping up fine details with thick blobs of paint. So thin down paint and build it up. Okay, so next up I'm going to take some pure Oth1 grey, and again going back to the inside of the cloak. So again, thin down and just building those layers up. So everything on the outside here is going to be the brightest, which will eventually be white, and then as we come towards the inside, we'll leave some of that 50-50 tone showing through some of the paint slightly, and that will just give us some internal shadow right under the cloak there. So I do this on both sides of the cloak, and some of the area that you can see between the legs, just picking off pretty much the raised area and the large flat area down here. Okay, so next up I'm going to take some Seraphim Sepia, and I'm just going to apply this over the banner piece there, the scroll, and this is just to add some shading down into those letters nice and quick. It saves trying to dry brush over the letters with a lighter colour and leaving the letters dark. We can paint over the whole thing and then add the dark back in with the sepia wash. And then what I'll usually do is rinse the brush off and just dry it up, and then just using the capillary action of the bristles, just pull away some of that ink that's pulled up on any flat surfaces, or just seems to be, you know, any areas that I don't want it, and I'll just pull it out. And if I find that I've pulled too much, then I'll just grab some more of the sepia and just dot that back in where it's needed. Okay, so once that's had time to dry, I'm now going back in with the Zandri dust and just picking out the outside of the letter in there, being very careful not to touch back into anywhere I've already done. And you'll notice that with this scroll, again, I'm bearing in mind that the light is coming from above the model, and so there'll be a small area as the scroll folds back under itself that will be darker. And so as I work between the Zandri dust and some bleached bone for highlights, I'll leave that under area darker, and then the areas that are more open to the light source will have the brighter bleached bone. So always working with pretty much a base colour, a 50-50 mix of the base colour and the highlight colour, and then the highlight colour, working with thin down mixes each time, and then slowly blending from one to the other, or layering from one to the other, gradually building up that tone and colour that I want. Okay, so with this next layer, like I said earlier, just taking some bleached bone and just putting in a few lighter areas along the edges and tops of the banner, and just picking off some of the bottoms of the indentations of the scrolling, just to lighten a few areas up. Okay, so next I'm going to take some white scar, and this is going to be my highlight and final layer for the inside of the cloak here, and this will just give it that nice clean crisp white colour over the top of the grey. Again, I'm working with this thinned down, so it will take a few layers, and obviously always being keeping in mind the light source, and using the side of the brush just to pick off those edges there. So you can see now how the sharpness of that white, the bright white, works well with the blue there, and you can see the highlights on the blue, and then not forgetting the little symbol in the corner here, as well as the one on his right knee. Okay, so now that we've got the cloak completely finished, as well as some of the smaller details on the model here, we're now going to focus on the armour itself, the gold armour. And for this I chose to do a non-metallic metal, and I'm using a mix or a combination of Rhinox hide, Uriel yellow, Phalanx yellow and white scar. And what I've done is set up in my palette the Rhinox hide, a 50-50 mix of Rhinox hide and the Uriel yellow, then the Uriel yellow on its own with a 50-50 mix of the Uriel yellow and the Phalanx yellow next to that, and then a 50-50 mix, then the Phalanx mix on its own, the Phalanx yellow, then a 50-50 mix of the Phalanx yellow and white scar, and then a pure white scar on its own. So basically you've got, starting from the brown, moving down to the white, pure colour of each with a 50-50 mix of the two colours in between those. I hope that makes sense. Right, so at the minute I'm using the 50-50 mix of Rhinox hide and the Uriel yellow, and this will give it a greenish brown colour, which is what we want for the mid-tone of the golds. Obviously you've got your Uriel yellow will be your golden gold, and then you've got your 50-50 mix of Uriel and Rhinox hide will be your shadow tone or your mid-tone, and then the dark tone will be the Rhinox hide, and from there I then work up. Now these are thinned down with some water, and then I'll build these up in thin layers to get the effect that I want. Now as I'm doing this, I'm being careful or mindful to keep a very thin gap between the panel that I'm painting and the adjacent panel, if it has a raised edge or a dropped edge. so there's a little bit of the black showing. So you can see here, I'm just getting a nice even coverage over the panels. What I'll do for the purposes of keeping this tutorial or paint preview as short as possible, I'll just show how I did the one leg here, as well as the chest piece and the shield and sword, just so we're not going into full detail over every piece. If you would like to see a more in-depth video, let me know down in the comments, and I'll try and do a real in-depth sort of very step-by-step showing palette, everything that I do, so that you guys can see how exactly I work. But like I say, for the purposes of this video, I'll just go over the principle and the basics with the leg here. So the way that I tend to work when doing non-metallic metals is a section of the model at a time, so that I can make sure that I've got each area finished, and then I can move on to the next. So obviously in the case of this model, I'll work with the shin and foot of the left leg, and then the one of the right leg, and then the knee pads and the thigh pads, the chest, then the shoulder pauldrons, then the gauntlets, and then the helmet. And I will get each section up to an area where I'm happy that it's looking close enough to gold for me. So what I've done, you can see here that I've separated the back of the calf muscle here, the lower part of the calf muscle, the heel of the foot, and then there's a dark area between each of those pieces, and that's to give the effect of shadow and light reflecting off of these metallic surfaces. And in the case of the shin, you'll have the left and right side with a shine straight down the center, and then a highlight area along the front of each of the step downs of the foot there. But what I will do is speed up the video here so that we can see what I'm doing, and I can still talk to you guys without it being slow and boring. Right, so now you can see that I'm applying some thin down Uriel yellow, and these are going to be my highlight areas, and then I'm leaving just a gap on the foot there, which will be a shadow area. Obviously keeping in mind we got the bulge on the inner side of the thigh, and then again down the front of the shin there. So all the time working with thin down paint. This will be the Rhinox hide that I'm putting in here for the shadows. What I tend to do to start with is just sort of sculpt in these areas, get them with the pure mix of paint, so not too much of the 50-50 mix, other than the initial base coat that I laid down, and then I'll just go over areas, put in shadows anywhere where I think the light won't be able to get to. Now these aren't Rhinox hide shadows, these are still the 50-50 mix of the Rhinox hide and the Uriel. And basically I'm just trying to make sure that all the different plates of the shin and the foot are separated by shadow. So as you step down from a plate, there'll be a shadow, and as the plates are joined from shin to calf, there'll be a shadow, and from ankle to the lower part of the calf, and then from the lower part to the upper part, always a shadow between them, so that we can isolate those shapes and have the highlights pick them off. So all I'm doing here is just again just building up my layers, making sure that I've got my highlight on the edge there, on the outside edge, as well as the edges of the feet. So I'm just blending with super thin down paint, making sure that if it does pull up anywhere, it pulls up on a highlight section that I would want. Now what I tend to do is with the inside of the shin or the inside of the leg, it's not going to catch as much light as the outside of the leg would, as it would be under shadow from the body. So with my 3 primary colours, not including the white, and then the 2 mixed tones in between those, plus the white one, I will have the first 3, so the 50-50 mix of Rhinox hide, the Rhinox hide and the aerial yellow will be for the inside of the leg, and then the aerial yellow working up to white for the outside of the leg. Now this isn't an exact mix like that, but that's pretty much the basis that I work off. So you can see here now, as we've come back to normal speed here, that I'm just working on getting those highlights either side of the dark shadow down the side of the foot there. And the reason I put the shadow there is that obviously the armour, it's metallic. Although it's gold, with any kind of metallic surface, you're going to reflect different surfaces. So depending on the angle of the metal, you'll be either reflecting the ground near it or the sky, but then also any objects that are in close proximity to it. I tend to focus more just on the ground or the sky aspect. If you want to try and focus on all sorts of objects near to it, then obviously things like the inner thigh are going to start reflecting the lower torso. If he has his shield there, the outer thigh is going to reflect the inside of the shield, and you could really end up with a sort of a mishmash of tones and shades and colours, which in my opinion tends to look a bit too muddy on miniatures. So I tend to just focus on having a highlight from the sky, a reflection shadow from the ground, and then maybe a section of shadow or highlight just from nearby surfaces. So with the idea of feet, I will usually put the highlight on the top of the foot, the rounded part, as it's the closest to the sky, so it will reflect the sky the most, so it's going to be the brightest. And then coming down from that either side, you'll then get a shadow line about a third of the way down the foot. This is to reflect the horizon line as well as sort of the ground and things like that. And then follow again to the outside edge of the foot and the outside or the inside edge of the foot, again with more highlight, just to represent reflective light and things like that on the armour. Plus the edges, obviously they're going to show off the most light as they are the sharpest edges. So you can see here now I'm just using the lightest tone. This will be the 50-50 mix of the phalanx yellow and the white scar, and I'm just picking off where I want the brightest highlights to be. Now I do decide at a later point that I want a shadow line just from roughly where the tip of the brush is now, curving around towards the kneecap, so that it sections off the outside edge of the calf there. I could have left it like this, You know, in all honesty, it does look fine with that flat edge, but I wanted to give it just a little bit more of a contour that isn't there, so I just put in a little bit of shadowing. So all I'm doing now is just speckling in some reflective highlights. Another thing that I like to do is right along the crease at the top of the foot as it becomes the shin, I'll put a bright white highlight along there as well, as I feel that that makes the rhinox hide contrast. You've got your bright highlight right next to that dark shadow, which will make both of them, the shadow and the highlight, contrast a lot more to each other, which would give the model more of a gold look. So we'll jump on here onto working on the chest armour. So you can see here I've got the knee pad on this side done, as well as the thigh plate there, and you can see the difference on the inside of the foot and shin to the outside, where it's slightly darker and more muted on the inside. So again, I'm now taking this 50-50 mix of rhinox hide and Ariel yellow, and I'm taking the chest as three main areas. You've got the left pec plate, the right pec plate, and then the rim that goes over the abdomen and between the plates. So first of all, I'll work laying down this base colour. This is just so I can see where my mid-tone will be, and I'll do this on both sides, and just making sure that I get a nice crisp line along that edge there. And these are slightly rounded on top of the pec plates, so they will catch a little bit of highlight up there. And now I'm working on the abdomen curve, or the abdominal curve, that is just under the plates there. And you can see I'm just leaving an amount of shadow, a dark tone, just under the pec plates there, to keep them separated. It's always good to have a dark area near your light area, so that you've got them two high contrasting surfaces. And what I'm imagining is, if the light is coming from the surface, then the highlighted area is going to be down the center of the chest, so it's going to pick the upper inner two portions of the pec plates, and then the highest peak of the curve on the abdomen piece there. So again, just multiple thin down layers over the top to get that nice build up of tone that we want. Okay, so again, I'm now speeding up so that we can fly through this a little bit quicker. So as you can see, I'm just building up my layers with this mid-tone, and I think I've now gone into the rhinox hide and just picking out the shadow areas. So that's right on the outside edges, where the armpits would start to become, as well as the centerpiece and the underside of the pectoral plates. I'm now taking some mixed down or thin down phalanx yellow and the Uriel yellow, and just putting in the highlight area on top of the plates. Then all I'm doing is carefully switching backwards and forwards. I don't tend to rinse my brush too much between these, but I'll switch backwards and forwards between that mix and the phalanx yellow, sorry, the Uriel yellow, and just blend the two together, and carefully blending them down into that eventually becoming Rhinox hide down in the bottom edges, the outside edges of the plate armour. Okay, so you can see here, just going back in with some of that brighter yellow, and I'm just blending it down over the shadow areas. Now, although this does tend to cover up some of that shadow area that we put in to start with, that is giving some base tone behind what we are putting down over the top, as it is a darker shade and we are using thinned down paints. Whereas if we were using pure opaque paints, we'd end up just covering this up completely. So like I said, all I'm doing is just being mindful the whole time that the upper inner area is where the highlight will be, and then my shadow will be down in the area that you can see me brushing in now. And all the time putting a brighter tone at the top, blending it down, and then putting a darker tone at the bottom, blending that up. And it really is just a case of working backwards and forwards, blending from one to the other until you get that gradient that you're happy with. So again, with here I'm just putting in some Rhinox hide for some dark areas, some undertones, and to break up the plates a little bit. And here is the phalanx yellow, just blending that in and up so that the plate armour itself becomes mostly phalanx yellow, with the highlight area being the Irial yellow and the darker area being the 50-50 mix. I do say with a technique like this, although you can watch somebody doing it, and you know, there are people out there that can probably teach it better than I can, it really is one of those things that just comes with practice, going over and over, backwards and forwards, and just building it up very thin layers to get it, you know, to the point that you want it at. And it does take, you know, multiple models and attempts to get used to it, to get the hang of it, and it is a time consuming process, which is why generally this technique is used for special character models and, you know, individuals that are going to stand out on the battlefield if you play games, or character models if you have them for display purposes. Otherwise we tend to just go with the gold paints in the true metallic metals. So again, I'll skip ahead now so that we can see how the chest armour looks when it's done, and then we can move on to the next piece. Okay, so I've got the chest plates done, and you can see that I've done the pauldron there. Next up, I'm going to paint the leather straps. I suppose you could call it his leather loincloth piece, I'm not sure the exact name. But for that, we're going to take some Mechanicus Standard Grey and some Dawnstone, and as it's already painted black, we're just going to do some simple highlights over the leather straps there. So first of all, using the Mechanicus Standard Grey, I'm just going to pick off some of the larger flat areas, leaving some of that black in the lower recesses. and just picking off the edges. And while we're doing this, I would like to take this moment to thank you all for sticking with me so far on this this painting video. If you have enjoyed it, please remember to hit that like button, and it would be super awesome if you could consider subscribing to the channel, and that way there'll be I'll be able to produce more videos and content for you guys, knowing that you're happy with what I am doing so far. And you know, it's super awesome to have something that you're passionate about, such as this channel for me, to see it grow. So now I'm just going over with the Dawnstone here, and again just picking off some of the sharpest edges of this leather. So what I'll do now is go ahead and skip to the arm and sword, and we'll see how we do that piece. And welcome back. So as you can see, we've gone for a little bit of a sped up section here. Again, just to try and keep the video a little bit short for you guys. But essentially the same as any other section, I'll go ahead and lay in the base tone of the Rhinox hide and the Iriel yellow. Now with this piece, it's essentially, I think it's a lion's face, and the way that I try to approach this is each of the bars here that make up the detail for the face, I'll look at them as individual pieces, and so I'm essentially painting each one with a shadow, a highlight, and a mid-tone, and then obviously with the nose and the cheeks being their own piece. So again, I'll lay down the base coat, put in my mid-tone, and then work up to my highlight on each individual piece. I do go over this a few times to get it to the point that I'm happy with. I'm using the Rhinox hide for any deep recesses and deep shadows, anything that would be under the shoulder or under the arm. And again, it's just a case of picking where I want those highlights to be. In the case of the majority of this, it is in the middle of each raised edge. So I'll go from the outer edges of that raised edge, working my way in, going from dark to light, eventually coming with a white highlight down the center of each piece, as well as on the edge of any major raised areas. So any sharp edges, the area that I was just painting in there with this phalanx yellow, will eventually end up with a white highlight down the center of it, which will then go over the bridge of the nose. So essentially imagining that it was a solid piece, like I did with the other shoulder, it would have a central highlight that runs down the middle, and then because it's not a solid piece, each I suppose you could call them strands of hair, but each raised edge would be its own curved piece, which would then have a highlight. So the center of a curve, to me, will always be the highlight area as it reaches the apex before it curves back down on itself, so back down the other side. Right, so unfortunately the video for the majority of the arm became corrupted, and so I wasn't able to, or aren't able to show how I finished the arm and the grip of the sword. But you can see, you know, from how I was doing the gold originally, that is how we do it. So what I'm doing here is moving on to the sword now and smashing models around. But I'm using Reaper paints for this, for the Reaper Bones range, and for these colours they are the Mountain Stone, the Tempest Grey, and the Bleached Linen. Now you can use any dark, light and mid grey for this. For example, you could use Mechanica Standard Grey or Eshin Grey, along with Dawnstone and Ulthuan Grey. It is entirely up to you, and I know that Reaper and some other companies do a non-metallic metal range where you can buy, you know, the 3 tones that you need to come up with a non-metallic metal effect. So working on the blade of the sword here, I tend to work my swords a little bit differently towards the compared to the traditional method. Most painters will have a dark area at one end of the blade and the other end with a light area in the middle, and then on the bottom half of the blade they'll reverse that, so they'll have a darker area in the middle and then lighter on the ends. I prefer to go with what would be considered a more realistic approach, and this is working on my idea that the top of the blade, or the top half of the blade, would reflect the sky and the bottom half would reflect the ground. So in theory the bottom half of the blade would be darker than the top half, and so with this I'm working with the Mountain Stone as my darkest colour, which is the closest to the centre of the blade there, and then I'll gradually blend that down into the Tempest Grey, and that will be my dark tone along the bottom. So it's going to get lighter as it goes from the centre to the outside edge, but it is going to be darker in tone than what it will be on the top half of the blade, whereas the top half of the blade will go from the Tempest Grey to a mix between the Tempest Grey and the Bleached Linen on the top edge, and again that goes the same for the inside of the blade. So at the minute we're painting the outer side of the blade, as it's on in his left hand, and then the inner side will be painted pretty much exactly the same, though I may go slightly darker in tone on the inside, as it is going to reflect some more of the ground and the body and that. But on the outside edge we go light on the top half, dark on the bottom half, or darker on the bottom half. So I'll just speed up the video for you here, and then you can see how exactly I go about blending these colours up into the final sort of look of the blade. Okay, so now I'm blending down that mix of Tempest Grey and Bleached Linen, or it would be the Ulthuan Grey and Dawnstone, or whatever colour of your lightest shade and your grey would be. The reason I use a slightly tinted white rather than pure white is that then still leaves us the option or the availability of pure white for extreme highlight and reflections. So you can see now I'm putting a thin glaze of the highlight colour, so that's the 50-50 mix of Tempest Grey and Bleached Linen, and I'm just washing this over the top half of the blade to get it to really brighten up and stand out against the darker lower half of the blade. And again, the same with the gold. This is just a case of going backwards and forwards, almost wet blending, but it is more towards the glazing, as it does dry a little bit quicker than what it would do if you were wet blending. Excuse me. But the idea is to get that highlight blending down into a mid-tone, and then going from a dark tone blending down into essentially the mid-tone again. So at the moment this is 2 times speed, so obviously you can see, you know, how much work it does take to get this to the effect that I want. What I'm doing now is just taking the bleached linen, super thin down, and I'm just putting a highlight reflection across the blade, so going from the top half of the blade all the way down through the bottom half, and then feathering it out on the bottom half so that it doesn't contrast as strong. And now I'm just glazing back over with the Tempest Grey or the Dawnstone if you're using Citadel paints. This is a super thin glaze just to tone that highlight back a bit. And then all I'm doing is just glazing over and then adding highlight back in, glazing over, and just trying to get that balance that I want between the contrast of dark and light, along with the reflections of light within the blade itself. So again, just taking some of that dark Tempest Grey, Mountain Stone, sorry, and just brushing right along that edge of the blade there, the centre of the blade. And then again going back in and adding this highlight back in. Okay, so what I'm doing now is with some pure white, again thinned down, I'm just marking in some highlights. So the areas that I put these pure white highlights, right up the centre of the blade, from the hilt right to the point, as well as the bottom and top edges, so the sharp edge of the blade as well. For that I'll tend to use the side of the bristles with some thin down white paint, usually white scar, and I'll just drag that right down the edge. And then all I'm doing here is just taking some more of that Mountain Stone, the dark grey, and going back in right along that edge, being careful not to go over the white that I've already laid down, but coming just right up against it to give it a nice sharp crisp edge, which will also give it that dark contrast right against that white sharp contrast, which will make that shine stand out a little bit more. And then again just blending it out and checking that I'm happy with the reflection, and that it's, you know, as close to silver or steel as I like. Okay, so with the sword done, the video didn't capture the last bit that I wanted to show you. and all that is just a very super thin down glaze of any kind of light blue. I tend to use Techless blue, just as a very thin glaze to go over the blade of the sword, all over it. And what this will do is just give it a slightly blue steel tint, and then once that's dried, I'll then go back in with pure white, usually white scar, and just pick off those sharp edge highlights along the outside edge of the blade, as well as the one down the center, being as careful as I can to get a nice straight line up the center of the blade there. So moving on to the head now. You'll notice that I haven't got this attached to paper clip or pin vise or anything like that. I'm happy with this particular headpiece to just hold it by the hair section there, and just paint the gold areas in. So again, for this I'm using the Uriel yellow, thinned down, and I'm just giving it a couple of coats across the top of the headpiece there, the halo type piece, and then obviously over the face itself and the back of the helmet. And again, the same with all the gold areas. If you would like to see any specific areas on how to do gold, for example a head like this up close, you know, going into detail of it, or a gauntlet, a shoulder piece, a chest piece, you know, anything like that with an in-depth video, let me know down in the comments, and you know, I'll try my best to get some close-up videos for you guys to have a look at. It is something that I do plan on doing for Patreon videos further on down the line, but if you guys, you know, if I get enough interest on YouTube here, then I'll skip the Patreon paywall, and at least for the time being, and go ahead and allow you guys access to more in-depth, up-close tutorials to see, you know, exactly how to do this. It's a little bit hard doing a full model that takes 6 hours to paint and compress it down into a 1 hour video, or however long this video is going to end up being by the time I've finished it editing this. But you know, it is difficult to try and show every little stage and step whilst going into fine, you know, explanatory detail with it. So let me know down in the comments if that is something that you would like to see me do, you know, individual piece videos, and I'll try and set something up for the future. And otherwise, obviously, I do hope you enjoy the video as it is and as it stands now. So as with the rest of the armour, we go in with the Uriel yellow, or a mid-tone of it, which is a mix between the Uriel yellow and the Rhinox hide. And for this I'm covering the entire helmet, bar the black neck collar that he has just around under the chin area and the behind the neck. As I said, I don't mind holding this by the hair. If any paint rubs off, it's going to end up painted once I attach this to the model. I'm just painting the gold areas separate from the model, so that I can get under that chin area without getting paint on anything I've already you know, painted to completion. That way I don't have to go back and touch up difficult to touch up places. So again, with the head, it's just a case of working up, imagining that the skull at the top of the head is a spherical object, so that's going to carry the brightest highlight, which will be the phalanx yellow and skull white mix, with a small area of pure white scar, sorry, not skull white, working on some older colours there. so that's the white scar mix, and then working outwards towards the outside edges of the face and the lower under the eyes and under the chin area, under the nose, with the 50-50 mix of Rhinox hide and the Aerial yellow, just to add some shadow under there. It's not going to be dark shadow, so there shouldn't be too much need for the Rhinox hide on its own, just maybe a few places inside the eye sockets and under the neck, for example. And in regards to the halo, again, it's an arch, so the way that I look at it is the center area, the highest point, the apex of the arch, will be lightest, so that will be a bright white, working outwards towards the Rhinox hide on the very outside edges. The way that I tend to do that is, obviously I've gone in with the Rhinox and Uriel mix, and then I've blended that with the Uriel yellow alone, and then touching into the Phalanx yellow, and then into the white. I'm barely cleaning my brush between each pass as I mix between the colours. That way the paint itself is being mixed on the bristles, and it's just a case of blending it up until we get that almost white highlight in the middle. Rinse the brush out completely, and then take the white and just put that highlight, and then brush that down any sharp edges. Okay, so now that I've got the arms and the head attached to the model, I'm going to go ahead and paint the shield. So obviously the sword arm is completely done, the head is all but done, it's just the hairpiece left, and now we're onto the shield. So the same as the cloak and the shoulder pauldrons, we're using a flat base of Cantor blue. I have gone ahead and painted the inside of the shield whilst it was still separate from the model, but it is easier ultimately to paint this, the outside of it attached to the model. So that's the way that I choose to work, is paint the inside, affix it to the model, and then paint the outside. I think the only area that I have to be a little bit careful is just on the very inside edge here, as it comes up close to the knee, and obviously I don't want to get any of that blue on the knee. But it's simple enough, easy enough to get in there. Okay, so once all the blue on the shield is done, it's now to paint the gold on the top part of the shield there, as well as the hammer down the centre. So I'm just going ahead again with the thinned down mix of Phalanx yellow, Uriel yellow, sorry, and the Rhinox hide, and I'm just giving this a straight coat over the top of the area that is to be gold. Obviously being careful all the time not to go onto anything that I've already done. And again, the shape of the shield is it has a curve to it, so the highlight is going to be down the centre of the shield where the curve meets its apex. And what I'll do is leave the inside of the recesses, so the little lightning bolts that you have on the corners, I'll fill them in with the Rhinox hide, so that they become the sort of the darkest area. So you can see here I'm just working to get a nice even coat of the Uriel yellow. Right, and obviously the same with the hammer here, moving down and getting a nice base coat on the hammer and the thunderbolts. Right, so you can see here now I'm taking some of that Rhinox hide and Phalanx yellow mix and just putting in the shadow areas on the outside edges here, and I'm now going in with some of the pure Rhinox hide and just marking off the dark shadows under the lightning bolts and on the very outer edges. And although it's sort of very blocked in at the minute, you can see that I do start to blend that back with a thin down mix of the 50-50 mix of Rhinox hide and Uriel yellow, and then working that back into the lighter area with the pure Uriel yellow to brighten it up again and get that smooth blend from the outer brown gold to the brighter yellow gold in the middle. What I also do is pick up the lower edges of the thunderbolts there just for a bit of highlight, as the light would catch on them. Now going in with some pure white, I'm just picking out my highlight areas. Again, this is thinned down slightly so that I can build it up to the brightness that I want, and just picking off the edge highlight here, and then that center highlight on that the lip of that outturned bit at the top there. And now just going around and putting the highlights in, and basically just going over and blending those transitions up, brightening the brown up a little bit with some thin down Uriel yellow, basically glazing over the top just to tint it more towards the yellow side or the golden side, and then going in now with some thin down Rhinox hide and just picking up the gap in between those two pieces of metal. And now I'm just going on the inside of the armour there. It's just some of the mounting stone just to pick off some of the grey areas on the black gauntlet that he has in there. And now I'm just blending out some thin down white on the highlights there, and now just picking off the rivets with that white. Okay, so now I'm just taking some slightly light blue. This is Teclis blue mixed with a bit of the Cantor blue, and I'm just putting a highlight down on the outer curved edge of the shield here, and I also do the same with the centre of the shield just above the hammer, which is where I feel the light would be picked up and cause a little bit of reflection. So with this I put in quite a bright highlight, a wide highlight, and then I'll tone that back down and blend it back in with some thin down Cantor blue, just going over where that contrast starts. So where that hard line is, I'll just blend that down until it becomes a smooth transition into that highlight. Okay, so with all that done, I'm now going in with some white scar, and I'm just gently brushing over the banner on the shield here, and so I can leave the areas where the writing is, that'll be in black, and I'm just gently brushing over the top to pick off the banner itself in pure white. This does take a couple of layers to get it nice and smooth. It's a little bit more towards the wet side of dry brushing rather than a complete dry brush. That will give it a nice little effect. So here I'm just taking some super thin down black and just going in those letters, just touching up and letting that pool up in there, just to make them stand out just a little bit more against the white. Right, and finally I'm going to take some corn red and just apply this over all of the hair area, but what I'm doing is almost like a dry brush, just pulling the paint across the raised edges, leaving some of that base black paint in the deeper recesses there, and I'll apply this over the whole of the headpiece here, and then all I do is take some white and gradually add more and more white to the paint to get towards a pink tone, and I just gently brush it across, blend it in whilst getting lighter and lighter towards the edge, and then picking out a few strands of hair that I want to be sort of that brighter pink colour. And there we have it, guys, the finished knight-Questor. So once again, I'd like to thank you all for joining me for today's video. If you like the video, hit that thumbs up button, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos every Monday for Mortal Realms Monday. So I will catch you guys next time. Thanks a lot.